Before we begin this incredible true story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon, so you never miss another emotional journey like this one. Now, let's dive into a story that will stay with you long after you finish reading. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace gates as royal guard Thomas Bennet stood at his post. He had served the royal family for 15 years, and in all that time, he had seen many unusual things. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to happen on this ordinary Tuesday morning. A woman came running toward the gates, her hair disheveled and her face pale with fear. She was crying so hard that her whole body shook. Thomas immediately straightened up, his hand moving instinctively to his radio. Palace security was always on high alert, and any unusual behavior needed to be reported. But something about this woman made him pause. Her eyes held a desperation that went beyond any threat to the royal family. She reached the iron gates and grabbed them with both hands, her knuckles turning white. Thomas could see she was in her mid-30s, wearing a simple blue dress that looked like it had been thrown on in a hurry. Her shoes were mismatched, one a sneaker and the other a flat sandal. This woman had left her home in such panic that she hadn't even noticed what she was wearing. Thomas approached carefully, keeping a professional distance. The woman's words came out in broken sobs, barely making sense at first. She kept pointing toward the street behind her where a white van was parked about 50 meters away. The van looked ordinary enough. Nothing that would normally catch anyone's attention. It was the kind of vehicle you would see making deliveries every day in any city. But the woman kept insisting something was terribly wrong with that van. She begged Thomas to please look inside it. Her voice cracked as she spoke, and tears streamed down her face continuously. Thomas felt torn between his duty to protect the palace and the genuine terror he saw in this woman's eyes. His training told him to call for backup and keep her away from the gates. But his instincts as a human being told him this was something different. The woman explained that she had been walking to the bus stop when she heard something coming from inside the van. At first she thought it was just her imagination, but then she heard it again. A sound that made her blood run cold. A sound that no mother could ever ignore or mistake. It was the muffled cry of a child, maybe more than one child. Coming from inside that locked van, Thomas felt his heart begin to race. If what this woman was saying was true, then every second counted. He looked at the van again, studying it more carefully this time. The windows were covered with dark tinting that made it impossible to see inside. The vehicle sat alone on the street, with no driver visible anywhere nearby. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. And Thomas had learned to trust that feeling over his years of service. Thomas made a quick decision. He radioed his supervisor and explained the situation briefly. Within minutes, 2 more guards arrived at his position. He told them to stay with the woman while he went to investigate the van. His supervisor gave him permission but warned him to be extremely careful. This could be anything from a false alarm to a dangerous trap. As Thomas walked toward the van, he noticed several things that increased his concern. The van was parked in a loading zone where vehicles were not supposed to stay for more than 15 minutes. Yet this van looked like it had been there for a while. A thin layer of morning dew covered the windshield, suggesting it had been parked since the previous evening. The license plate was partially covered with mud, making it difficult to read the numbers clearly. Thomas approached the driver's side first, looking through the tinted windows. He couldn't see anything inside. The darkness behind the glass was complete. He knocked on the window firmly, identifying himself as palace security. There was no response. He walked around to the back of the van and placed his ear against the metal door. For a moment, there was only silence, and he wondered if the woman had imagined everything. Then he heard it. A soft whimpering sound, so faint that he almost missed it. Then another sound, like something moving inside. His blood went cold. Someone was definitely inside that van, and from the sound of it, they were in distress. Thomas immediately radioed for police backup and ambulance services. This was now officially a serious situation. He tried the back door handle, but it was locked. The side doors were also secured. Thomas knew he had to get inside that van. But he also knew that breaking in without proper authority could cause legal problems later. However, If there were children in danger inside, the law was clear. He had a duty to act immediately to save lives. Thomas returned to the palace gates where the woman was still waiting, now surrounded by 3 guards. She looked at him with desperate hope in her eyes. He asked her to describe exactly what she had heard. The woman said she had heard at least 2 different voices, both sounding young, maybe between 5 and 10 years old. They were crying and calling for help, but their voices were weak, as if they had been crying for a long time. While waiting for the police to arrive, Thomas questioned the woman more carefully. Her name was Margaret Chen, and she worked as a nurse at a nearby hospital. She had been on her way to work when she heard the sounds from the van. At first, she had walked past it, thinking it was nothing. But something made her stop and go back. That instinct, that feeling that something was wrong, had brought her to the palace gates seeking help. Margaret explained that she had tried to open the van herself, but when she couldn't, she panicked. She didn't have her phone with her because she had left it charging at home. The nearest shop was closed at that early hour, and she didn't see anyone else on the street. Then she remembered the palace guards were always nearby, so she ran to get help. Her decision to trust her instincts and seek help immediately might have saved lives. The police arrived within 8 minutes, though to Thomas it felt like hours. 2 patrol cars pulled up near the van, and 4 officers stepped out. Thomas briefed them quickly on everything he knew. The senior officer, Detective Sarah Williams, took charge of the situation immediately. She had 20 years of experience and had seen many difficult cases. But even she looked concerned when she heard about the children possibly trapped inside. Detective Williams approached the van and called out loudly, identifying herself as police and asking anyone inside to respond. There was no answer at first. Then, very faintly, they all heard it. A small voice, weak and frightened, called out from inside the van. The child was saying something that sounded like "help us," but the words were muffled and unclear. That was all the confirmation they needed. One of the officers brought out tools to break open the back door. Detective Williams gave the order to proceed. The lock was strong, designed to keep people out, but the officers were trained and equipped for exactly this kind of emergency. It took them about 3 minutes to break through. Those 3 minutes felt eternal to everyone watching. Margaret stood with Thomas at a safe distance, her hands clasped together in prayer. When the doors finally swung open, everyone present gasped at what they saw. Inside the van were 3 children huddled together in the corner, 2 girls and 1 boy, all looking terrified and exhausted. They were dirty, their clothes torn, and their faces stained with dried tears. The youngest looked about 6 years old, while the oldest might have been 9 or 10. They squinted in the sudden brightness of daylight, their eyes having adjusted to the darkness of the van. The ambulance team rushed forward immediately. The paramedics were gentle and careful as they helped the children out of the van. The kids were weak and dehydrated, having been trapped inside for what must have been many hours. One of the girls was clutching a small stuffed rabbit, holding it so tightly that her knuckles were white. The boy had a cut on his forehead that had bled and dried. The other girl seemed unable to speak, her eyes wide with shock. Detective Williams spoke to the children in a soft, calm voice, telling them they were safe now and that no one would hurt them anymore. She asked them their names. The oldest girl, who was clearly trying to be brave for the younger ones, whispered that her name was Emma. The boy was her brother Jake, and the youngest girl was their neighbor's daughter, Lily. Emma said they had been taken the previous afternoon, while playing in the park near their homes. The medical team examined the children, right there on the street. While Detective Williams continued gathering information, Emma explained that a man had approached them at the park saying he had lost his puppy and asking if they could help find it. It was an old trick, but it worked on trusting children. Once they followed him to the van, he had grabbed them and locked them inside. They had been trapped in the dark van for almost 18 hours. Margaret began crying again, but this time with relief. She had trusted her instincts, and because of that, these 3 children were now safe. Thomas felt a surge of emotion that he hadn't expected. In his 15 years as a royal guard, he had protected important people and valuable property, but this was different. This felt more important than anything he had ever done in his entire career. These were innocent children whose lives had just been saved. While the paramedics continued treating the children, Detective Williams focused on finding the person responsible. She ordered her team to search the van thoroughly for any evidence. They found several disturbing items inside. There were ropes, duct tape, and a bag containing sandwiches and water bottles, suggesting the kidnapper had planned to keep the children for an extended period. Even more chilling was a notebook they found in the front seat containing a list of names and addresses. The 3 rescued children's names were on that list. But there were 7 other names as well. Detective Williams immediately called for additional units and contacted the families listed in the notebook. This was bigger than anyone had initially thought. The kidnapper had been planning a series of abductions, and Emma, Jake, and Lily were just the first victims. If Margaret hadn't heard them, and if Thomas hadn't acted quickly, this situation could have become a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. The van was registered to a rental company. Detective Williams contacted them immediately, and they provided information about who had rented the vehicle. The name on the rental agreement was David Miller, age 42, with an address in a nearby suburb. Police units were dispatched to that location right away. Meanwhile, forensic teams arrived to process the van for fingerprints and DNA evidence that could help build a strong case against the kidnapper. Thomas stayed with Margaret. While all this was happening, she was shaking, the adrenaline finally wearing off and leaving her exhausted. One of the officers brought her some water and a blanket to wrap around her shoulders. Thomas could see she was a hero, though she probably didn't feel like one. She kept asking about the children, wanting to know if they would be okay. The paramedics assured her that while the children were dehydrated and frightened, they had no serious physical injuries. They would need time to recover emotionally. They would survive this ordeal. About 40 minutes after the rescue, Detective Williams received a radio call. Officers had arrived at David Miller's address and found him trying to pack a suitcase. When he saw the police, he attempted to run, but was quickly apprehended. During the arrest, he became violent, which only confirmed to everyone that they had caught the right person. He was taken into custody and transported to the police station for questioning. Back at the scene, the children's parents arrived. The moment Emma and Jake saw their mother and father, they broke down completely. The family embraced in the middle of the street, all of them crying tears of relief and joy. Lily's parents arrived moments later, and the scene repeated itself. These parents had spent the entire night in absolute terror, not knowing if they would ever see their children alive again. Now, through a combination of luck, instinct, and quick action, their worst nightmare had ended. Thomas watched these reunions and felt emotions he rarely experienced in his line of work. He had always taken pride in his professionalism and ability to remain detached, but this was different. Seeing these families reunited reminded him why he had chosen this career in the first place. It wasn't about standing at gates or following protocols. It was about protecting people. It's about being there when someone needed help. Detective Williams approached Thomas and Margaret to thank them personally. She explained that, without Margaret's awareness and Thomas's quick response, this case could have ended very differently. The kidnapper might have moved the children to a different location, making them much harder to find. Or worse, he might have panicked and hurt them. Instead, they were safe, and a dangerous criminal was in custody. She told them both that they should be proud of what they had accomplished that morning. Over the following days, more details about David Miller emerged that shocked everyone involved in the case. During questioning, he initially refused to speak, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. His fingerprints were all over the van, and security camera footage from the park showed him approaching the children exactly as Emma had described. Faced with this evidence, he eventually began to talk. Though he showed no remorse for his actions, David Miller had been planning these kidnappings for months. He had been watching children at various parks around the city, taking notes about their routines and identifying which ones would be easiest to approach. The notebook found in the van contained detailed information about each potential target, including their usual schedules, the parks they frequented, and observations about which children seemed most trusting or isolated from adult supervision. The investigation revealed something even more disturbing. David Miller had a criminal history that included previous charges related to child safety. Though he had never been convicted of kidnapping before, he had moved to the area just 6 months earlier, and the rental company had not conducted a thorough background check before renting him the van. This raised serious questions about how someone with his history has been able to operate so freely. Detective Williams discovered that Miller had been unemployed for over a year and was heavily in debt. During questioning, he admitted that his plan had been to demand ransom from the children's families. He had targeted middle-class families who might have some savings, but wouldn't have the resources to hire private security or investigators. It was a calculated, cold-blooded plan that showed complete disregard for the trauma he would cause. Thomas learned all of this through follow-up meetings with Detective Williams. As someone who had been directly involved in the rescue, he was kept informed about the case's progress. Each new detail made him more grateful that Margaret had trusted her instincts and that he had taken her seriously. If he had dismissed her as just another worried citizen, if he had waited for more confirmation before investigating, those children might still be missing, or worse. Margaret was struggling with the aftermath in her own way. She had become somewhat of a local celebrity, with news outlets wanting to interview her about how she heard the children and made the decision to get help. She declined most of these requests, saying she was just doing what anyone would do, but Thomas knew that wasn't true. Many people would have convinced themselves they were imagining things, or would have assumed someone else would handle it, or would have been too afraid to get involved. The hospital where Margaret worked honored her with a special recognition for her bravery and quick thinking. Her colleagues told stories about how Margaret had always been the kind of person who noticed things others missed, who paid attention to small details that might seem insignificant. These qualities that made her an excellent nurse were the same ones that saved 3 children's lives that morning. Meanwhile, Emma, Jake, and Lily were receiving counseling to help them process their traumatic experience. The therapists working with them said that while the kidnapping had been terrifying, the fact that they were rescued relatively quickly would help their recovery. Children who endure prolonged captivity often suffer more severe psychological damage. These 3 children had been scared and uncomfortable, but they had been found before Miller could move them or hurt them. More seriously, the families of the other children on Miller's list were contacted and informed about the danger their children had been in. Many of them came forward to thank Margaret and Thomas personally. One mother broke down crying when she met them, explaining that her daughter had been at that same park the day before the kidnapping, and Isley could have been taken instead. The randomness of who became a victim and who stayed safe was haunting to everyone involved. 3 months after the rescue, David Miller was convicted on multiple charges, including kidnapping, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit further crimes. The evidence against him was so strong that even his own lawyer advised him to accept a plea deal. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 20 years. The judge, while delivering the sentence, specifically mentioned how fortunate it was that Margaret Chen and Thomas Bennett had intervened when they did, preventing what could have been a tragedy affecting multiple families. Thomas was recognized by both the palace and the city police department for his actions that day. He received several commendations and was even invited to a special ceremony at the palace, where he met members of the royal family. They thanked him for his service and for demonstrating the true meaning of duty and protection. But for Thomas, the greatest reward came from knowing those 3 children were safe and slowly returning to normal life. Margaret's life changed in ways she never expected. Her story spread through social media and news outlets, inspiring people around the world to trust their instincts and take action when something feels wrong. She received hundreds of letters from parents thanking her for her bravery. Some people even started a community safety program inspired by her actions, training people to recognize signs of danger and know how to respond appropriately. Emma, Jake, and Lily slowly healed from their ordeal. With the help of therapy and the support of their families, they learned to process what had happened to them. Emma, the oldest, said in a later interview that she wanted to become a police officer when she grew up, so she could help other children the way Detective Williams had helped them. Jake became more cautious but not fearful, understanding that while bad things could happen, there were also good people ready to help. Lily, the youngest, took the longest to recover, but with patience and love from her family, She began to smile again. The community where the kidnapping occurred made significant changes to improve child safety. More security cameras were installed in parks and public spaces. A neighborhood watch program was established, with trained volunteers who could recognize suspicious behavior. Parents organized safety workshops teaching children about stranger danger while also emphasizing that most adults were trustworthy and helpful. Thomas and Margaret stayed in touch after the incident. They had shared an experience that bonded them in a unique way. They met occasionally for coffee, talking about regular life, but always aware of how that one morning had changed both of their paths. Margaret told Thomas that she sometimes wondered what would have happened if she had just walked past that van, convincing herself she was imagining things. Thomas reminded her that she didn't walk past it, that she chose to act, and that choice made all the difference. In the years that followed, Thomas approached his work with renewed purpose. He no longer saw his job as just standing guard or following procedures. He understood that being alert, being willing to investigate concerns, and being ready to act could mean the difference between tragedy and rescue. He trained newer guards to always take citizens seriously, to trust their instincts, and to remember that their real job was protecting lives, not just property. Margaret continued her work as a nurse, but she carried the experience with her in everything she did. She became even more attuned to people's needs, more willing to speak up when something seemed wrong, more confident in her ability to make a difference. She told people that the most important lesson from that day was simple. When you see something that doesn't feel right, when your instincts tell you someone needs help, don't ignore it. Take action. Speak up. Because in that moment, you might be the only person who can save a life. The story of the Royal Guard, the woman who wouldn't walk away, became a reminder to everyone about the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. It wasn't a complicated rescue requiring special skills or equipment. It was simply two people who paid attention, who cared enough to act, and who refused to ignore a problem that seemed too small or too uncertain. Their actions that morning created ripples that touched countless lives, proving that sometimes the smallest decision to help can have the biggest impact. The 3 children they saved went on to live full lives, and they never forgot the strangers who became their heroes on that terrifying morning. When everything could have gone so differently,